Hello, everybody. How are you doing this fine Sunday? I'm doing quite well. Just kind of haven't really stopped working for 2 weeks. So there's that. Okay. So I got another update for y'all on the Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively lawsuit, Wayfair, or whatever, all that front. So as you probably know, actually, let me pull up my web. I know y'all love that web. I know we have all these parties, so it does get a little bit difficult to keep up, but what we are going to be zooming in on today has to do with this one, Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. Now, when I say Justin Baldoni in this particular video, what I mean is all these parties over here. That would be Justin Baldoni, Jamie Heath, Wayfarer, Steve Sarowitz, or whatever his name is. So each of these parties, maybe not every single one, but pretty much all of these parties individually have filed their own lawsuits as well as filing their own motions to dismiss. So what we have right now is both sides kind of coming at each other in full force. We have cross complaints, meaning Blake Lively is not only suing Justin Baldoni and all these people, but all these people are also suing Blake Lively. Both parties, both Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, both of them are basing their arguments on this conspiracy theory of liability, meaning Blake Lively is being held responsible, or at least Justin Baldoni is trying to make her be held responsible for statements that were made by Leslie Sloan, statements made by Ryan Reynolds. Likewise, Justin Baldoni is being held responsible for things Jamie Heath said. Vice versa, Jamie Heath is being held responsible for stuff Justin Baldoni said. So after Justin Baldoni and them did file their lawsuit against Blake Lively and the New York Times and all them, well, Blake Lively filed then her obviously own suit back against Justin Baldoni, but Blake Lively also filed what is called a motion to dismiss. Blake Lively, I did cover this in my Blake Lively playlist. You can go and catch up if you are behind. But generally, Blake Lively relied on a few different principles and doctrines in order to try to get out of this lawsuit. She doesn't even want to have to go to depositions on this. She doesn't want to have to go to court on this. She's just trying to get rid of the whole thing. She filed a motion to dismiss the whole entire lawsuit as against her own self. I did go over that lawsuit, but the things that she was relying on have to do with privileges, which make her statements she alleged her statements were privileged. You can't get sued for defamation. You can't be held liable, especially for defamation, on these privileged statements because they are protected by certain doctrines. Now, one of the doctrines that Blake Lively did try to argue she was protected by is called the litigation privilege doctrine. Now, the litigation privilege pretty much is put in place so that a litigant, a party to litigation, can speak freely in court and really tell the judge everything that they really think, tell the judge everything that happened without having to worry about everything I say in this lawsuit is going to be grounds for a defamation claim. So Blake Lively said, look, not only is there this current lawsuit, not only am now I being sued over it, but there was this underlying CRD complaint where I was asking for the right to sue. And remember the CRD complaint where people were like, it's not really a complaint. It's not a real lawsuit. It's just a complaint or whatever. But like complaint is the first step of a lawsuit, y'all. Remember all that? Okay. So Blake Lively is saying, look, all of the stuff that Justin Baldoni is complaining about and Wayfair and all them are complaining about, that's protected stuff because I was talking and opining about litigation. Another doctrine that Blake Lively tried to say that she was protected by is called the S harassment. I can't say, terms and conditions and all that, but the S harassment privilege. And this is colloquially sometimes referred to as the Me Too law, where essentially, we want to create an environment in society where people who are victims or who allege to be victims of purported abuse, especially of the S harassment type at work, in an industry or whatever, then those people should be allowed to talk about what happened to them without being held liable for defamation. That being said, those claims do have to be made in good faith, which is something that, I'm just foreshadowing an argument you're going to hear Justin Baldoni make. This is all just recap right now of what actually happened in the Blake Lively motion to dismiss. Another thing that she claimed is that she cannot be liable for defamation because the things that she said, not only were they protected by the litigation privilege because they were said in relation to the CRD complaint, not only were they protected by this so-called Me Too law, but they were also protected by something called the reporting privilege or the fair report privilege. Now, the New York Times, who is another litigant in this case, the New York Times is also relying on this fair report privilege. The New York Times has filed their own motion to dismiss, and they are saying, leave us out of this. Blake Lively came to us with text messages and statements, and we thought she was telling us the truth. Motion to dismiss. We're allowed to report on stuff that people tell us because we are the news and we are a newspaper. Well, Blake Lively also, in her own separate, different motion to dismiss the same lawsuit, she also relies on this fair report privilege. And she is saying that this privilege doesn't only protect the New York Times. It doesn't only protect media sources, but it also protects the people who are giving the information to the sources. Namely, in Blake Lively's situation, she's saying her. She's saying she's protected by the fair reporting privilege because of the First Amendment. We have the right to tell people news and all of that. Okay, so that was kind of the recap. And then that brings us to the most recently filed document. This was filed 2 days ago, Friday, April 4th, docket number 163, I believe, 162, 163. We will pull it up, but I do want to just make sure that y'all actually understand what is going on because there's just so much stuff flying to and fro that I feel like if we're just sitting here reading through every single document, it all gets lost in the sauce. Okay, I just want to do the high points until we actually can finally make it somewhat closer to trial and see what actually survives. So other than those three privileges, which I think are really the substantive portions of Blake Lively's legal arguments, she also tries some other arguments just kind of like in case those ones don't work. She says that because Justin Baldoni is a public figure, he hasn't properly alleged that Blake Lively made her statements with actual malice. You know, that is one of the extra things that you have to prove whenever somebody's a public figure. On top of the actual malice standard, Blake Lively's like, he didn't even try to prove that I had actual malice in my statements. And remember, that is the standard where you have to show the statements, the false defamatory statements that were made with the knowledge they were false or with a very strong reason to believe that these statements were false. So Blake Lively is saying, no, I didn't think these were false. This was all good faith allegations. She also tries to argue that there was a statute of limitations issue that, some of Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer and them's claims, they are just simply time barred. Well, Justin Baldoni, Wayfarer, Jamie Heath, and all of them except Jed Wallace have finally responded to Blake Lively's motion to dismiss. They have issued their own opposition to this motion to dismiss. Again, this is only one of very many motions to dismiss. I also just made a video about Jed Wallace filing a motion to dismiss. This comes from the other side. Jed Wallace filed a motion to dismiss. Where is he? He's over here. He filed a motion to dismiss Blake Lively and them's claims. Okay, so I have a video that just came out on that. Now we're talking about Blake Lively's motion to dismiss Justin Baldoni and them's claims. She was trying to rely on all these privileges, litigation privilege, fair reporting privilege, the Me Too movement, SH reporting privilege. She's trying to say that it was too late, statute of limitations. She's trying to say that Justin Baldoni and them did not try to even prove that she had actual malice, which is a public figure standard. And she's saying all these other people, I'm not responsible for something Leslie Sloan, my publicist, said. I'm not responsible for something that Ryan Reynolds, that's my husband, how I'm going to control him. So those are some of the arguments that she made. Well, Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer and Jamie Heath and all of them, they have responded. They have opposed. This was filed 2 days ago. So taking it in turn, Justin Baldoni said, litigation privilege, no, because functionally what would happen is, let's say Blake Lively were able to convince the judge that her statements were so-called privileged. If she were to be able to convince the judge that her statements were so-called privileged, then the case would necessarily have to be dismissed, either because they were just simply the First Amendment or some other privilege, litigation privilege, the Me Too, harassment privilege, or the fair reporting privilege, then those causes of action would necessarily have to be dismissed. So it really is very important whether or not the statements were privileged by one of these privileges. So let's take them in turn. Litigation privilege. Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer and them have said no. First of all, a lot of the stuff that she said happened way before she was ever going to do anything about a litigation. This was a conspiracy, literally with the New York Times. This isn't like, oh, the New York Times is an innocent bystander that got lied to. No, 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 no. They are in on it. They are in on it. The litigation privilege, the Me Too privilege, the one where it's like you should be able to talk about as harassment if it happened or whatever. He said all of that only, even if it applied, which it does not, because Blake Lively is not acting in good faith. She made up, quote, fabricated the S harassment allegations, knowing for sure they did not happen. So this is not something that is privileged. It is a lie. The only way it could be privileged is if she didn't make it up. Now, of course, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds and them, they would say that's not true. You should make that up. But who knows what's true or not? Justin Baldoni is just arguing that Blake Lively made it up. You cannot make stuff up and then say it's privileged. That is not how that works. Then he also, so that's the Me Too privilege. The litigation privilege, he said she never actually planned to file a lawsuit. And the only reason she did file a lawsuit is because I called her bluff. So the fact that she made the statements to the New York Times that she made personally, this makes it to where she can't rely on a privilege about litigation privilege because she made these statements before she ever thought that she was going to litigate anything. And that litigation privilege, if you remember, is really put in place to protect people who say things in litigation. Justin Baldoni said the litigation privilege does not protect somebody going to talk to the New York Times. It protects somebody filing a declaration. It protects somebody saying something to a judge. The litigation privilege is not the protect you to say anything you want to out here in the world to the New York Times privilege. That's not the same thing. And then finally, the last privilege that she tries to plead is that fair reporting privilege, which I already did address a little bit. Is Justin Baldoni saying it's not fair reporting. You have to be doing something fair for the fair reporting. Y'all were conspiring and you knew that you were lying. Now, do I think that is necessarily the case? No, but I do think he makes a strong enough argument to survive the motion to dismiss phase. Because right now, we're not really even looking at a trial. We're not looking at did it happen, did it not happen. I want to remind y'all that the standard that has to be breached, the standard that has to be met at this point is not did they do it, did they not do it, and do you have proof it was done? The standard at the motion to dismiss phase, the judge is obligated to take everything that Justin Baldoni said in his complaint as if it were true. The same way that the judge is obligated to take Blake Lively and everything that she said in her complaint as if it were true. So that is not going to obviously be an assumption that lasts throughout the discovery and throughout the trial period. But before the trial happens, before discovery happens, that is whenever you have to file your motion to dismiss. Now, Blake Lively has filed a motion to dismiss Justin Baldoni's, and Justin Baldoni and them have filed motions to dismiss Blake Lively's, and everybody's got to get through their motion to dismiss before we can even get to trial. So Justin has also argued all this stuff about the statute of limitations is fake news. The earliest thing that I'm suing for is something Ryan Reynolds said in 2024 in July, so we're well within the statute of limitations of a year. And one other thing that Justin Baldoni is arguing here, which I think is honestly the strongest argument of his whole entire opposition. And again, when I'm saying Justin Baldoni, I'm talking about all those parties. I just don't want to keep saying every party every time. It just takes up so much time and brain space. But when I say Justin Baldoni, I'm talking about his side. But I think the strongest argument that Justin Baldoni makes in trying to make sure that Blake Lively doesn't get the case dismissed, it has to do with these two separate theories of liability. Blake Lively does not spend a lot of time discussing these theories of liability to my memory. I do not think that they adequately and thoroughly engaged with the argument. And I think Justin and their side makes a very strong argument about these two separate theories of liability. One theory of liability is called the conspiracy theory of liability. And that is where one co-conspirator, and these are legal terms, and, innocent until proven guilty and not liable and all that until proven. But I'm just telling you how, the definitions and stuff. What Justin Baldoni is saying is that there was a conspiracy. And so when there is a conspiracy, which means a bunch of people working together, more than two people, more than one person working together, they're conspiring to do something that isn't right, they don't have a right to do, and that isn't moral or ethical. They're all conspiring to break the law. At least some civil tort laws. So under the law, in the conspiracy theory of liability doctrine, then Blake Lively can and would be held responsible for things that any person in the conspiracy did do. That's first. Then there's a whole entire other theory of liability that Justin Baldoni and them rely on, having to do with agency and authorization. He's saying not only is Blake Lively a defamer who has no privilege to claim, but so is her husband, so are Leslie Sloan, her publicist. And these two people spoke and made defamatory statements of their own, not only as co-conspirators, but as agents authorized to speak on Blake Lively's behalf. This one was literally her publicity agent, literal agent. And so because she was authorized to speak on Blake's behalf, literally hired to speak to the media on Blake's behalf, for that reason alone, Blake Lively is responsible for what Leslie Sloan said because she never retracted it. Blake Lively never went out and said, no, what Leslie Sloan wasn't true. In fact, she doubled down. So for that reason, she now becomes responsible for everything Leslie Sloan said. So even if Blake Lively's own personal statements were privileged, now she's responsible for everything Leslie Sloan did, which I believe does allow it to survive a motion to dismiss, at least to get to discovery. Not only that, Ryan Reynolds, we got to get past that hurdle before we let Blake Lively out of this lawsuit. Not only a co-conspirator, according to Justin Baldoni, but also as her husband, he was an agent. He was authorized to speak on her behalf, which he actually did do, according to Justin Baldoni in the complaint, by talking to Justin Baldoni's own agent and trying to tell him not to have him come to the premiere, and also by talking to a representative from Justin Baldoni's agency at the Wolverine Deadpool premiere. Not only that, but they argue a third theory of liability called respondeat superior or employer liability. Not only was Leslie Sloan, according to Justin Baldoni, an agent who was like the legal term agent who was authorized to speak on the behalf of Blake Lively, who was authorized to make press statements on her behalf and deliver statements to the press. And not only, according to Justin Baldoni, was this a willing co-conspirator separate and apart from any agent relationship, but also Leslie Sloan, before we can dismiss Blake Lively out of this lawsuit, we got to deal with the fact Leslie Sloan was an employee, not only an agent authorized to speak, but an employee of Blake Lively. And therefore, like if, the employee gets in trouble on the floor, it can go back to your boss. If the employee beats somebody up, then it can be liable for the boss. If something happens in the building or the premises of the employer, then they could be held responsible. So the fact that Justin Baldoni is arguing the fact that Blake Lively was Leslie Sloan's boss, her actual boss, that gives a third level of liability. So not only is Blake Lively responsible for everything that she said, but according to Justin Baldoni, she's responsible for everything all the co-conspirators ever said and did, including the New York Times. She's responsible for everything Ryan Reynolds ever said or did as her agent under the law, not agent like a Hollywood agent, although that is a type of agent. This agent means like when you allow someone to speak on your behalf, or whenever it should be assumed that that person has the authority to speak on your behalf, like a husband or something like that. Not only is Ryan Reynolds responsible as a co-conspirator and an agent, but then there's also this employee liability. So, Your Honor, before we let Blake Lively off the hook, what about everything Ryan said? What about everything Leslie said? What about everything everybody else, the New York Times said? Because all these people, Justin Baldoni is saying, are co-conspirators, and under a co-conspirator theory, under a conspiracy theory of liability, Blake Lively is just as responsible for things Ryan Reynolds and Leslie Sloan said as she is for stuff that she herself said. Now, the final loose end there would be, and even if Justin Baldoni and them are saying, even if, let's say, these privileges, litigation privilege, PR privilege, all that crap, let's say all that applied. I don't really think that. I'm just kind of like, it's easier to understand when I get in character of the characters. So Justin Baldoni and them are saying, okay, fine, all that crap, let's just pretend Blake Lively herself, the things she said out of her mouth are privileged. Let's say she was allowed to say those things, even though we're arguing she definitely was not. They're not privileged, but let's just say they were. Ryan Reynolds isn't protected by the Me Too Act. He never privileged to say that to the agent. He never privileged to say that. Leslie Sloan isn't protected by that Me Too Act. She's an agent. The only person protected by the Me Too Act, Justin Baldoni says, is the person who alleges they were abused or harassed. Doesn't apply to Ryan Reynolds, doesn't apply to Leslie Sloan. And for that reason alone, the claims should stay alive, meaning they should not be dismissed. That's what Justin Baldoni is saying. And gotta be honest with y'all, I think he makes a strong argument. I would be very surprised. I would be maybe even shocked. I might even be shocked if the entire case were dismissed as to Blake Lively. Now, a lot of times in these lawsuits, the lawyers are just kind of throwing stuff at the wall to see what will stick past the motion to dismiss. So it is possible that some of these claims do get dismissed, but then some of them do survive, and then they do have to be litigated. So I'm not even going to pretend to guess which ones. Maybe the ones with The employer liability would be possibly most likely to stick because those don't seem to be subject to privilege. Plus, I mean, I don't know. I don't even want to guess, like I said. But yes, so now just take a small inventory, not a complete inventory, but we have motions to dismiss that were filed by many parties across both sides. Jed Wallace, Blake Lively has filed her opposition to his motion. I say this and discuss this in the other video that I do make about it, but just so that you know, I think that Jed Wallace is not going to be able to get the motion to dismiss passed. I think he's probably going to be stuck litigating this in the Southern District of New York, but I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. Blake Lively just filed an opposition last week. We're going to have to see what the judge says. As far as Blake Lively getting the case dismissed as to against her, I find it highly unlikely because she is so central to the case. And the allegations really all are central to her and Justin Baldoni. I think her and Justin Baldoni are the least likely to get dismissed, to have their cases dismissed. I do think the judge is going to want to hear at least some of these arguments and allow it to go to discovery and allow a jury to sort out what really happened. I think Justin Baldoni and them did a great job on arguing this opposition, and I'm looking forward to see how Blake Lively will respond. Now, Blake gets one more chance to reply. So Justin Baldoni just filed his opposition. Now Blake gets one more chance to give a reply. It's going to be short. I think they only get like a 5-page limit for the reply. And then after that, the judge will make a decision. I would not expect for the entire case to be dismissed against Blake Lively. She may or he may dismiss one, two, a few causes of action, but we will have to see. So the next thing to have your eye open for in regard to this specific piece of the case, which has to do with Blake Lively's motion to dismiss and Justin Baldoni and Wayfair's opposition to it, the next thing you should look for is going to be for Blake Lively to file a 5 or so page letter replying, and then for the judge to finally make a decision on that issue. That's all I really had for this one. In the meantime, facts ain't defamation. Love you, meaning. Okay, bye.